Now that I'm done talking about my least favorite Star Wars film, now it's time for me to talk about Attack of the Clones. Star Wars Attack of the Clones is directed by George Lucas. Now, in The Phantom Menace, I noticed there was a bit of a blend between computer animation and actual design sets. However, Attack of the Clones has an overabundance of CGI, from the blue screen to the green screen and even the clone troopers themselves. Now, what I'm about to say may not sit well with you, but hear me out. For a film that was made in 2002, I thought the CGI work to the clone troopers was something I consider to be impressive. At the same time, I do think that the clone troopers could have been played by actual people. And to be honest, I think the CGI work on the clone troopers didn't really pay off so well, and this would carry on in Revenge of the Sith. So say what you will about how the clone troopers were played out in the prequels when it comes to effects, but it didn't bother me too much, but it's one thing that I wish went a different way than what George Lucas insisted on. I have one defense about the CGI in Attack of the Clones, and that has to do with Yoda. Now, I'm going to go back to The Phantom Menace real quick to explain something about Yoda. Now, in the original version of The Phantom Menace, thanks to the Blu-ray edition having alterations to The Phantom Menace, Yoda's effects were by puppet, and most people have already said this, Yoda looks ugly in the original version of The Phantom Menace. And in the Blu-ray edition, Yoda's puppet effect was replaced with CGI Yoda. Now, this was to have consistency with the prequels. Now, the reason Yoda was changed from puppet to CGI was because of what happens later in Attack of the Clones. That being the lightsaber duel between Yoda and Count Dooku. Now, I'm actually okay with the CGI on Yoda because I think it makes sense. And the reason I say this is because had the film used puppet Yoda during the lightsaber duel near the end of the film, not only would it look silly, it would be near impossible to pull off. So it's understandable why there was a decision to make Yoda CGI for the film. And besides, thanks to the alterations in The Phantom Menace by completely changing Yoda's design to full-on CGI like the rest of the prequels, I'm okay with it. And also, I think the CGI work on Yoda was pretty good. In conclusion to the cinematography and filmmaking in general, I do think it's a bit of a step down when compared to The Phantom Menace. And that's largely because The Phantom Menace had locations that were gorgeous and nice to look at. With Attack of the Clones, there's a lot of over-reliance on blue screen and green screen. This is why when we see the actors act, it doesn't feel like they're there. And the movie really shows this. And this is a Star Wars movie, so yeah. And I know there's a lot of people that have made comments similar to what I just said, but, well, it's kind of true. Now, even though I am glad that Attack of the Clones doesn't contain as much wooden dialogue as The Phantom Menace, almost like everyone else, I cannot deny that the acting has not improved since The Phantom Menace. Hayden Christensen became a major issue with Star Wars fans, and it's perfectly understandable as to why. It's because Darth Vader was one of the most iconic and badass villains in cinema. And his real name was Anakin Skywalker. And the prequel trilogy was focused on Anakin Skywalker, which is kind of obvious. Now, the most common complaint about Anakin is that he is a whiny little bitch. And say what you will, I don't think it is entirely Hayden Christensen's fault. I am putting blame on George Lucas and how he directed Hayden Christensen to act a certain way. Unfortunately, we have to sit through Anakin's whining in the film, and I can't help but say that George Lucas is oblivious. He doesn't understand. He's making Star Wars fans angry. You know, I gotta admit the acting could have been good, but man, these actors are under bad direction here. If you thought Anakin's whining was bad, the entire performance of every romantic scene between Anakin and Padme was worse. For example,
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
And of course, when Padme confesses her love to Anakin,
I truly, deeply love you.
But I'm a creep. I'm a weirdo. What am I doing here?
Oh, Jesus, don't start singing that.
like it or not, the love story between Anakin and Padme had to happen in order to connect to the original trilogy. There is one factor of the whole thing that I still call bullshit, thanks to the fact that it's forever in Attack of the Clones. And that is the fact that Jedi are not allowed to love. Now, there is a fan theory regarding this that does sound feasible concerning this, and that is that the Jedi are equivalent to monks, which would make sense as to why the original Star Wars had Grand Moff Tarkin referring the Jedi Order as a religion. So, say what you will, but I'm not entirely sure about why George Lucas decided to write in that the whole thing about Jedis not being allowed to love. And yet, the love story is in there anyway. Now, I don't hate Natalie Portman, but this is one of her weaker performances. Now, if there's one actor I gotta admit wasn't that bad, was Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan. I thought he was okay in here. Now, there is one great actor in Attack of the Clones, and it is the late Sir Christopher Lee. I'm sorry, I don't give a shit about his character, but hey, Christopher Lee was in this, and yeah, I liked him in here. Now, there is one section of the film that stood out for me, even though one of the parts is cut short to ensure the PG rating, and that is when Anakin's mother dies in his arms. The anger I saw in Anakin, I thought was a legitimate scene, because I felt, oh gee, this is not going to end well. And then we get to see Anakin kill a couple Tusken Raiders while that part was cut short. But when we see Anakin carrying his mother's body back home, I actually thought the scene was effective. That was until he was saying a few things to Padme about what he did to the Tusken Raiders.
And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them.
The acting was over the top, but from a writing standpoint, it made sense. And the dialogue does support what Anakin is going through because he is grieving. It's just the delivery of the dialogue was a missed opportunity for what could have been a great scene. The strongest factor by default is the soundtrack by John Williams. Now, as far as the Star Wars soundtracks are concerned, I do think the soundtrack for Attack of the Clones is by default the weakest, because, let's face it, I don't think it's as memorable as the other soundtracks that the Star Wars saga has had before and since Attack of the Clones. So, but it's still good. It's just the other installments had memorable soundtracks when compared to Attack of the Clones. So, just by default, I do think it's the weakest. There is another aspect in the Star Wars saga that is the weakest in Attack of the Clones, and that is the lightsaber duels. It is by default the weakest, but also the way that the lightsaber duels are choreographed and performed, the lightsaber duels in Attack of the Clones do look awkward. And as much as I liked seeing Yoda pull out the lightsaber and attempting to kick some ass, part of the fight did look awkward when it came to Yoda jumping around all over the place. So, as much as I enjoyed it when I first saw it, I gotta admit it has not aged well. All in all, I actually enjoy Attack of the Clones a little bit more than The Phantom Menace. And the reason I say this is because whenever I rewatch The Phantom Menace, it's the same response as when I first saw the film, and that being, I think The Phantom Menace is boring. Now with Attack of the Clones, every time I rewatch it, I'm actually not bored. Yes, the plot is not written all that well, and the acting is pretty bad. But I find enjoyment in that whenever I make fun of Attack of the Clones, either while rewatching it or in discussion. So, because of that, I actually enjoy Attack of the Clones just a little bit more than The Phantom Menace. I give Star Wars Attack of the Clones a 5. If you like this review, feel free to hit the like button, and if you want to keep track of my upcoming reviews, feel free to hit the subscribe button. And as always, you are welcome to leave me a comment if you feel so inclined. And thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.